What if the FBI's most baffling case of 2025 wasn't a crime at all, but a cover-up? A small-town disappearance. 27 federal agents stumped, a diary filled with cryptic warnings, and a witness who vanished hours before testifying. This isn't just another cold case. This is the case they don't want you to solve. And tonight, we're opening the files they tried to bury. In the quiet town of Elkridge, population just under 9,000. The morning of March 2nd, 2025, began like any other cloudy skies, the scent of wet pine drifting from the forest line, and a kind of silence that only small towns know. But by sundown, that silence had turned into confusion, and by the end of the week, it had escalated into a full-blown federal investigation. It all started with the disappearance of a local woman named Abigail Wren, a 41-year-old art teacher known in the community for her gentle spirit, her watercolor paintings, and her refusal to ever leave Elkridge, even when she had the chance to exhibit her work in Chicago a year prior. Her sudden vanishing baffled locals, not only because she was deeply rooted in her daily routine teaching classes at the community center, helping her elderly neighbor with groceries and walking her dog along the same trail every morning, but because there were no signs of struggle, no indications of forced entry in her home, and not a single trace of her left behind, except for one thing: a leather-bound journal left open on her kitchen table. With a single phrase written across both pages in shaky handwriting, they re-not who they say they are. That journal, filled with weeks of cryptic entries and coded messages, become the center of one of the most perplexing investigations in modern FBI history. A case that pulled in over 24 agents from field offices across the country, triggered multiple search warrants, and even prompted the installation of temporary surveillance outposts deep within the forest bordering the town. But despite all this, no answers came, at least not to the public. As days turned into weeks, the media shifted their focus elsewhere, and Elkridge was once again forgotten, except by one person, Abigail's older sister, Margaret Wren, now 72 years old, who refused to let go of the suspicion that this wasn't just a case of someone gone missing, but something far more sinister. Margaret, who had stayed quiet for nearly 4 decades following the unexplained death of their brother in 1986, under equally mysterious circumstances, finally spoke out in late April 2025 during a closed-door interview that was never meant to go public. But it did. In a leak that sent shockwaves through the investigative world, audio from the session was uploaded anonymously to a dark web forum known for its Cold War conspiracy threads. In it, Margaret recounts a chilling moment just 2 days before Abigail disappeared. A man dressed in what she called military plainclothes visited their home unannounced, asking for Abigail by name, and left behind a single envelope marked "For your eyes only." That envelope, according to Margaret, vanished the following day along with Abigail. Things only got stranger from there. Weeks into the investigation, a witness came forward, a young man named Dean Caldwell, a seasonal worker at a local campground, claiming he had seen a black SUV parked outside Abigail as home at 3:17 a.m. the night she vanished. He remembered the time because his phone buzzed with a scheduled reminder just as he walked past the property. And he noticed 2 men inside the vehicle wearing earpieces, one of whom appeared to be looking directly at him. Dean, spooked but determined, agreed to testify in a closed hearing. But just hours before he was scheduled to speak, Dean disappeared too. His truck found abandoned by the edge of Ravens Lake. His phone left behind with a single unsent message that read, "I think they know." That's when the narrative started to shift from a baffling disappearance to something more calculated. Leaked FBI documents recently verified by independent cybersecurity experts show that agents had flagged Abigail's journal as containing potential references to an old Cold War-era operation called Echo Glacier, a program so classified that its paper trail all but vanished by the early 1990s. What we do know is this Echo Glacier involved the strategic placement of U.S. intelligence assets in rural American towns. Designed to monitor domestic sentiment and international interference in real time, using local civilians as unwitting observers, the question now is, was Abigail one of them? And if so, who was she watching? Or what did she discover? In the final days before the case was quietly filed as unresolved, A breakthrough emerged from an unlikely source. A forensic tech lab based in Baltimore, recently equipped with AI-enhanced fingerprint reconstruction tools, reanalyzed the partial prints found on the edge of Abigail's kitchen window prints that had been deemed inconclusive just months prior. What they found was staggering. A second set of fingerprints that matched no existing person in any government or international database, not even in experimental or classified archives. The identity was, quite literally, non-existent. We are left with a question that challenges everything we understand about law enforcement, surveillance, and secrecy in the digital age. How can someone who doesn't officially exist leave a print at a crime scene? And why has every single agent who worked this case been transferred or reassigned within months of their involvement? As this episode ends, new voice steps forward, an anonymous whistleblower claiming to be a retired intelligence analyst tied to Echo Glacier who says he has proof that Abigail Wren was never missing at all, but relocated, hidden, protected, or silenced, depending on who you ask. And next week, we'll take you inside his story, where he claims Abigail is alive under a new identity, and that her disappearance was part of a much larger plan involving classified experiments. Encrypted files buried in government servers and a political figure, running for national office in 2026. But if what he says is true, then someone is watching all of us. The whistleblower never gave his real name. He went by the code name Halcyon, term rooted in Greek mythology symbolizing peace, but his message was anything but peaceful. His first contact came in the form of an untraceable file drop to 3 independent investigative journalists, each of whom had previously worked on government corruption. Inside the encrypted folder were hundreds of pages of redacted communications, insurgency memos dated between 1984 and 2024, and chilling audio logs with time-stamped conversations between unidentified federal personnel discussing something referred to only as Subject Aaron. At first, the journalists thought it was a hoax fabricated. Documents with just enough accuracy to stir panic, but not enough to be taken seriously. But after forensic analysts confirmed the audio logs were genuine and the document headers matched internal FBI formatting used in high-clearance communications, the story took a turn. These files referenced a covert relocation program known as Silhouette Protocol, allegedly used to extract and erase the identities of individuals deemed either a threat to national stability or critical to classified operations. And according to Halcyon, Abigail Wren was one of them. In a 48-minute encrypted video message sent to the media team, Halcyon speaks from a dimly lit room, his face blurred by real-time masking algorithms. He claims to be a former signal analyst for a now-defunct NSA subdivision, Project Telemann, a black-budget initiative focused on domestic pattern recognition. An event simulation, a method of predicting potential future threats using behavioral modeling. In 2021, he was tasked with monitoring irregular communication signals in rural areas with high proximity to defunct Cold War listening posts. One of the areas flagged for anomaly spikes, Elk Ridge. Halcyon says the anomalies weren't just signal distortions, but encrypted data packets being sent from a specific location every Thursday, between 2 o'clock and 2:15 a.m. The coordinates matched Abigail Wren's property. He was instructed to submit weekly analysis, but never received feedback until early 2025, when his clearance was suddenly revoked. And he was placed on administrative leave with no warning. That's when he began his own investigation, tracing back the anomalies and reviewing his archived data logs. What he discovered, he says, shook him to his core. The encrypted signals had fingerprints of Soviet-era cipher Kaspecically, an algorithm known as Graphen, believed to be defunct since 1989. It's somehow reactivated and piggybacking on private domestic satellite bandwidth. And the messages, while mostly indecipherable, included partial text strings referencing locations, personnel ID numbers, and in one case, the name of a sitting U.S. senator listed as Access Asset Level 3. If this is true, it doesn't just implicate the involvement of Cold War infrastructure. It suggests someone inside the United States government was actively communicating using foreign-era encryption with someone or something located at or near Abigail Wren's residence. But it gets darker. Because Halcyon didn't just come with documents and claims. He provided a photo low resolution, clearly taken from a distance, but unmistakable. It shows a woman, believed to be Abigail, stepping out of a vehicle outside what appears to be a secure compound in North Dakota. The time stamp. 3 months after she was declared missing, she's wearing a heavy coat, sunglasses, and is accompanied by 2 men with visible earpieces. The compound, according to satellite records, belongs to a private defense contractor with ties to biometric research and identity obfuscation technologies. The implications are staggering. If Abigail's alive, then the entire federal investigation complete with local interviews. Press briefings and internal panic was never about finding a missing woman. It was about containing a leak. But a leak of what? And why now, after decades of secrecy, would her identity suddenly become a threat? We reached out to the defense contractor for comment. They denied all involvement and stated they do not possess or have ever possessed any information regarding an individual named Abigail Wren. Shortly after, 2 of the journalists who received Halcyon's files reported suspicious surveillance outside their homes. One of them, a former war correspondent, had his laptop seized by federal agents citing a national security concern. The other has since gone offline entirely. Meanwhile, in Elkridge, a new mystery begins to surface. Locals report seeing strange low-frequency pulses on their radio stones that don't match any standard bandwidth. Wildlife in the area has become erratic. Deer migrating at unnatural times. Birds circling abandoned structures in patterns that locals say resemble symbols, geometric shapes traced through instinct. And a former Elkridge councilman came forward, anonymously, to say that the town received federal funding in the late 1980s for a municipal signal amplifier. Supposedly meant for emergency alerts, the records show the device was never used, not once in 35 years. Some now believe it wasn't meant to broadcast but to receive. As the story spreads, more voices emerge at a military, contractor software engineers from the 1990s, claiming to have worked on programs matching the Silhouette Protocol signature. Even a linguist who once consulted on Cold War translation software and says the phrasing in Abigail's journal Docen T match her educational background, but matches that of encoded field communication scripts used in Soviet counterintelligence training. How would an art teacher in a quiet American town write like a spy? And here is where we leave UN, the edge of a theory that some say is too wild to believe, but others argue is the only explanation left standing. Because if Abigail Wren didn't vanish, she was taken, or worse, volunteered to disappear, ... Then who exactly was she working for? And is she still working now? In the digital world, silence is rarely ever empty. When someone disappears in the physical world, it's their online presence, or a sudden lack of it, that can be the loudest scream. And when Abigail Wren vanished, her digital footprint was more than quiet. It was meticulously erased. Her emails, phone backups, even third-party image caches from social media platforms vanished within 72 hours of her disappearance. Not deactivated, not archived. Deleted with a level of precision that most cybersecurity experts would say requires either internal access to global server nodes or state-level clearance. But we found something the Erasure team missed. A forgotten cloud archive tied to Abigail's teaching Java backup system used by the Elkridge Community Learning Center that stored old student work, grading logs, and teacher comments. Hidden in a subfolder titled Portfolio Submissions 2019. A single mislabeled video file was tucked away, its name, a random alphanumeric string. What we expected to be a student art critique turned out to be a 22-minute screen recording. At first glance, it appeared to show Abigail reviewing digital sketches submitted by her class. But halfway through, the cursor veers off-screen. She hesitates. Then clicks open a secondary window, a secure messaging platform unknown to most civilian users. And what she types next, line by line, is a quiet confession. They're watching me. Every Thursday, the pulses get louder. I dream in symbols. When I wake, I draw things I don't remember learning. If I disappear, tell Margaret I never stopped looking for the others. The others. A word that would reappear 3 more times in her unfinished drafts and hidden file attachments. The context was always vague, but what we beginning to understand is that Abigail was convinced she wasn't healed not just in being watched, but in being chosen. And she believed there were more people like her people unknowingly tangled in a decades-old program whose full purpose is still unclear. And then we found one of them. Her name is Eleanor Rhee, a 67-year-old retired systems analyst who now lives off-grid in the mountains of Oregon. When contacted by our team, she initially denied any knowledge of the Abigail Wren case, or of Echo Glacier, or Silhouette Protocol. But something changed during our second visit. She invited us inside, placed an old flip phone on the kitchen table, and quietly said, "I hoped I'd never hear that name again." Over the next 3 hours, Lenora opened up about her work in the early 1990s for a company contracted by a Department of Defense subagency she still refuses to name. Her job involved behavior modeling simulations based on civilian data collected from small communities across the U.S. She says her team was told the goal was early intervention for domestic threats. But over time, she began noticing something strange. Certain individuals flagged by the system were not threats. They were artists, teachers, writers, people who, as she described it, had a pattern of nonlinear thinking that confused the predictive models. When she raised questions, her access was revoked, her security clearance stripped, and a month later, a colleague who had voiced similar concerns was found dead, officially ruled a suicide, though Eleanor never believed that story. She says that in the years that followed, she received 3 anonymous packages. Each contained only a photograph. Different faces, different towns, different states, but each person in those photographs, she's now certain, was connected to what Abigail Wren uncovered. And then she showed us something else. Up, pinned with coordinates she'd been tracking for nearly 20 years. Each point represented a documented case of a disappearance that was never solved. All of them were people with no known criminal history, low public profiles, and one unusual commonality. Every single one had either taught, volunteered, or exhibited at a community center equipped with government-funded technology grants issued through the same department that oversaw Abigail's old school in Elkridge. It's no longer a coincidence. This was systemic. And now we are beginning to understand why Abigail's journal included coded warnings, not just paranoia scribbled in fear, but calculated notes meant to be decrypted by someone who understood the language of psychological operations. In fact, we brought in a former military codebreaker, who after weeks of analyzing Abigail's entries, uncovered a cipher that matched the frequency pattern of Cold War intelligence. Brit. GOTS once aired from number stations across Europe. The decoded message is incomplete, but one phrase stands out: awake, aware, activated. Abigail wasn't hiding from something random. She was preparing for something she believed had already begun. And now, people around the country are coming forward. A former priest in Louisiana, a farmer in Montana, a piano instructor in Vermont. They've all reported similar dreams, vivid imagery involving unfamiliar architecture, numbers that repeat across different contexts, and an overwhelming urge to record their experiences in coded form. Some even claim to hear frequencies no one else in their household can detect. They're beginning to find each other online, in encrypted forums and hidden networks, using the term the chosen drift. We don't know yet if this is mass hysteria, an echo chamber of the internet, or the next evolution of a buried psychological operation. But one thing is clear: something is waking up, and those who are experiencing it believe Abigail was only the beginning. As we prepare the next episode, we've received word of another whistleblower, this one claiming to have direct access to the original Echo Glacier files, including internal memos that name not only Abigail Wren, but a living senator, a CEO of a major tech firm, and a former vice president, all allegedly connected to an early version of what now known as the Drift Network. And that's not all. Because hidden within those files is said to be a master lista registry of individuals targeted for surveillance or activation. Names, dates, locations. What we've just uncovered could change everything. But it's also dangerous. Because the deeper we go, the more it feels like this story was never meant to be told. when we received access to the first decrypted memo from the alleged Echo Glacier files. We weren't prepared for how detailed or how personal it would be. This was not just a bland intelligence log filled with bureaucratic jargon or blacked-out fields. This was a precise behavioral analysis of a young woman from a small town in Ohio. Her name was Christine Harlow, age 27, a music teacher with no criminal record, no political affiliations, and no family history tied to federal agencies. Yet this document, labeled Subject CH27, classified her under Tier 2 drift suspect. What did that mean? According to the memo, Christine exhibited signs of non-conforming rhythm cognition, a phrase that on its own means nothing, but when cross-referenced with a second document, it appears to be shorthand for auditory perceptual divergence. In simpler terms, Christine could hear patterns and frequencies that others couldn't. She had once told a colleague that the hum of the school's fluorescent lights felt like they were speaking in Morse code. That comment, seemingly harmless, was apparently enough to flag her. And in a chilling twist of déjà vu, Christine disappeared on July 17th. 28 and just one day before, she was scheduled to attend a music therapy conference where she was slated to present her research on how low-frequency vibrations affect the subconscious mind. Her case, like Abigail's, remains open, unsolved, and largely forgotten. But now, with these documents finally coming to light, we begin to see that this isn't about a single woman, a single disappearance, or even a single government program. This is about a quiet network system that has watched, filtered, and categorized ordinary citizens based not on what they've done, but on what they could become. And the registry? It's real. At least, that's what Halcyon says. And he's not the only one. Over the past 6 weeks, we've received encrypted messages from 4 different sources, claiming to have seen or possessed fragments of what they call the drift list. One former software contractor, who worked briefly on biometric encryption systems for a military subcontractor in 2007, described seeing an internal test database with roughly 200 names flagged with cryptic designations like pattern unstable, dreamlock, and cognitive echo variant. He said he didn't understand what those meant at the time, but when he tried to access the list a second time, the file had been erased and his access permanently revoked. 3 days later, he received a letter informing him that his services were no longer required. Another source, this one from inside a federal research facility in Utah, claims that the drift list isn't just a file, it's part of a living database, constantly updating itself through satellite and civilian surveillance, social media behavior, even keystroke, rhythm analysis. And if you think that sounds too far-fetched, consider this. One of the internal memos references a pilot program initiated in 2015 that used Facebook data to train a predictive model for cognitive irregularities. Not to prevent crime, but to preemptively identify non-standard neuropsychological activity. Which brings us to the Cold War transmission, the one sent from a now decommissioned government facility buried in the snowfields of North Dakota. This video, marked with the call sign Station Epsilon 4, is grainy, distorted by static, and time-stamped February 14th, 2025, just 16 days before Abigail Wren disappeared. The footage shows 2 men seated at a long table. Their faces are obscured, possibly intentionally blurred through analog distortion, but their voices are clear. They are discussing Subject W, a woman who has awakened prematurely. One man refers to a reverberation incident that's causing data feedback into the host layer, language that seems more at home in a science fiction novel than an intelligence memo. But the part that froze us was the final sentence before the transmission cuts to black. Containment is no longer possible. Initiate drift isolation. Begin silent transfer. Prepare Site B for arrival. Drift isolation. Silent transfer. Site B. These aren't phrases from a missing persons case. These are the operational commands of a system prepared for containment, removal, and replacement. And the phrase Subject W Wren, is that Abigail? To dig deeper, we spoke to a linguist specializing in Cold War-era communication, someone who once decoded East German spy transmissions during his service in Berlin. He believes the terminology suggests that Abigail and others like her were not only identified early in life, but groomed, trained, even unknowingly, to serve a purpose they were never told. He calls it cognitive conditioning through environmental stimuli. Subtle. Long-term behavioral shaping using education, media, and location-specific frequencies, which forces us to ask, is this a case of surveillance gone too far, or is it something entirely different? Because now, we have word of a new anomaly. A second video transmission, this one intercepted just days ago from a separate abandoned military base in Alaska. The timestamp, March 17th, 2025, after Abigail was presumed dead. In this footage, heavily degraded by snow and signal interference, a female voice speaks for just 8 seconds. If they find this, tell Margaret I'm still here. Tell her it's not just me. The voice is believed to be Abigail Wren. We are currently in the process of authenticating this recording with voice pattern specialists and machine learning analysis tools. If confirmed, this would be the first proof that Abigail is not only alive, but trying to reach out from a secure facility, possibly Site B, as referenced in the earlier memo. And it raises a terrifying possibility. She may not be alone in that place. Others may be with her. Others we haven't even heard of yet. And more are being taken. As we move into the next phase of this investigation, we've discovered that Site B may be located in one of 3 possible states, all of which are home to former Cold War era facilities, now registered to shell corporations or listed as abandoned research stations. We're preparing to send a team into one of them, a journey that could bring us face to face with the truth behind this conspiracy, or end this investigation permanently. It began with one disappearance, quiet art teacher from Elkridge, who left behind no signs of struggle. Only a journal filled with cryptic phrases and a single sentence that changed everything. They re not who they say they are. From there, the mystery unfolded like a code embedded deep inside our own history, one marked by Cold War secrecy, experimental surveillance, programs, forgotten military sites, and a list of ordinary people flagged not for what they did, but for what they could become. Abigail Wren was never just a victim. She was a node in a network, part of a chain reaction set into motion decades ago. Whether she volunteered, was chosen, or was taken, we may never fully know. But what we do know is this: her story unlocks something that was never meant to be uncovered. From the lost journal entries to the intercepted video transmissions, from the decoded ciphers to the anonymous whistleblowers who risked everything to speak, we now understand this was never a simple case of a woman gone missing. It was a program, a pattern, shadow system, hiding beneath the surface of small towns, forgotten files, and the silence between government statements. The story took us to forgotten bunkers in the north, encrypted voice messages barely audible beneath layers of static, and interviews with survivors who carry the emotional weight of lives rewritten. We spoke with families still searching, people who claimed to hear frequencies in their sleep, and experts who warned that this was just a test phase, and that the real operation may still be active. And through it all, one name kept resurfacing: Margaret Wren, the sister who never gave up, who endured decades of unanswered questions, and who now carries the truth alone. Her final message to us was quiet, steady, not filled with rage, not broken by grief, but marked by clarity. They told me Abigail was gone, but now I know better. She wasn't taken from us. She was taken for something, and if this is the end of her story, it won't be the end of mine. And maybe that's where we leave it for now. Story with no clean ending, no courtroom closure, no final press conference. Just questions, patterns, signals, and the knowledge that somewhere, beneath layers of silence and denial, the truth is still pulsing, still waiting to be found. This was the story of Abigail Wren, of a sister search, of a trail buried beneath decades of redaction, and of a world that may never admit what really happened. Because to do so would mean admitting it could happen again. But remember, just because the story seems over, doesn't mean it is. Because somewhere out there, new files are still being uploaded, new names are still being added, and somewhere in the static, she might still be trying to reach us. So if you found this story as unsettling, fascinating, and deeply human as we did, please take a moment to like this video. Your support helps us continue these investigations, dig deeper, and bring you stories that others are too afraid to tell. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What do you believe happened to Abigail Wren? Do you think the Drift Network is still active? Have you seen something in your own town that made you wonder? We want to hear from you. Share this episode with someone who needs to see it. Hit the subscribe button so you don't miss what we uncover next. And make sure you click that bell icon, because our next story might drop when you least expect it. This investigation may be over, but the truth isn't finished with us yet. We'll see you in the next episode. Until then, stay curious, stay safe. Keep watching.